The morning of the auction smelled like iron and wet soil. Samuel had learned long ago to read the weather of a place not by looking at the sky, but by reading the people in it. Today, the sky above Beaufort, South Carolina, was a washed-out gray, the kind that pressed down on the earth like a thumb. The traders moved quickly, their boots slapping against the wooden platform as they arranged their human merchandise. The overseers barked orders. The buyers drifted in, slow inspecting, their faces carrying the practiced calm of men who spent money without feeling. Samuel stood in a line of 11. He was 23 years old, though no one had bothered to record it anywhere. He knew his age because his mother had whispered it to him every birthday like a prayer. You are 7, you are 12, you are 17. As if the counting itself was a form of protection, a way of saying, you exist, you are real, you matter. His mother had been sold to a rice plantation in Georgia when Samuel was 8. He had not seen her since. He had been on the Holt plantation for 6 years. Before that, the Carver farm. Before that, somewhere whose name he had never learned, only fields and a red barn, and the smell of tobacco that had embedded itself so deep in his skin, he thought he'd carry it to his grave. He would not carry it much further if everything went as he feared. The Holt plantation was being dissolved. Old Man Holt had died in the spring, and his sons, two thin quarrelsome men from Charleston, had no interest in keeping the land. They wanted cash. Simple mathematics, land, livestock, tools, and people, all reduced to figures in a ledger. Samuel had watched the ledger being made. He had been listed as Samuel, field hand, strong, no known ailments. $1,100, $1,100. He did not know whether that was a lot or a little. He knew only that it was the price of him, of everything he was, compressed into a number that meant he would be moved again, worked again, owned again. He did not plan to allow it. The plan had formed slowly, the way most honest plans do, not in a single moment of inspiration, but across weeks of observation, accumulation, and quiet calculation. Samuel had learned from a man named Moses, who had escaped 10 years prior and been caught and brought back. Moses had not escaped again, but before the lash took the spirit from his eyes, he had told Samuel one thing that lodged itself deep in the younger man's mind like a splinter. Don't run from somewhere, run to something. Samuel had spent those weeks identifying the something. He knew from whispered conversations, from fragments overheard in the kitchen house, from the careful geography he'd assembled in his mind during years of field work, that there was a network, not a road, not a line on a map, but a constellation of brave souls who passed freedom seekers northward like water through cupped hands. He knew there was a woman named Harriet who had made the journey herself and come back to lead others. He knew there were Quaker farms along certain roads in North Carolina, where a man might find a meal and a hiding place in a root cellar. He knew that the auction block in Beaufort was near the water. And he knew boats. 6 years on a plantation bordered by tidal marshes had made him intimate with the waterways. He had poled flatboats through the creek systems since he was 17, hauling tools and provisions to remote fields. He knew the tides. He knew which channels connected to which. He knew that 3 miles east of the auction house, there was a narrow cut through the marsh grass that led to a larger creek, and that creek eventually widened and bent north. He had also, over the past 3 weeks, moved things. Small things. A coil of rope, hidden beneath a particular cypress root. A bag of cornmeal wrapped in oilskin, tucked into the hollow of a downed pine along the marsh edge. He had stolen nothing he couldn't afford to lose, and nothing that would be immediately missed. He had planned for hunger, for cold, for dogs, for rain. He had planned for capture too, and decided he would not be taken. The auction began at 10 in the morning. There were perhaps 40 buyers in the yard. Some sat on chairs brought out from the warehouse. Others stood in small clusters, talking in low voices about the quality of the crop season, about politics, about a war that Samuel had heard mentioned with increasing frequency and about which he understood, in his bones, something important was shifting in the world. He did not know when or how, but he could feel it, the way you could feel a storm coming off the water. Not yet visible, but present. He was 8th in line. He studied the layout as each person before him was called forward. The platform was a raised wooden stage, perhaps 4 feet off the ground, with 2 steps on the left side and a rope barrier on the right. The auctioneer was a red-faced man in a brown coat who spoke quickly and gestured like a preacher. 4 overseers with rifles stood at the corners of the yard. 2 more walked the perimeter. But Samuel was not looking at the overseers. He was looking at the wagon. A delivery wagon had pulled in through the side gate 20 minutes earlier and was now parked just inside the fence, loaded with feed sacks. The driver, a free black man named Elias, whom Samuel knew only by sight, was supposed to collect something after the auction. Elias had looked at Samuel once briefly, with an expression that contained no recognition and no warmth, which was exactly what Samuel had hoped for. He didn't know if Elias was a part of the plan. He didn't know if Elias knew anything at all. What he knew was that the wagon was pointed toward the north gate, and the north gate led to the road, and the road bent left toward the marsh within a quarter mile. He was 8th in line, the 7th person, a woman named Cora, seamstress whom Samuel had never spoken to, but whose quiet dignity he had always admired, was led up the steps. Samuel watched the buyers. He watched the overseers. He watched the auctioneer raise his mallet. He closed his eyes for 1 second. He thought of his mother's voice counting his years. He thought of Moses saying, "Run to something." He thought of the rope under the cypress root, the cornmeal in the hollow pine, the northern stars he had memorized like scripture. He opened his eyes. He dropped to one knee as if something had gone wrong with his leg. The overseer nearest him glanced over. "Get up," the man said. Samuel rose, slowly, deliberately favoring his left leg. He limped slightly. The overseer watched him for a moment, then returned his attention to the platform. Samuel did not limp. His legs were perfectly sound, but he had created, in the overseer's mind, a small uncertainty, a categorization, not a threat. Something lame, something already devalued, when Cora stepped down from the platform and the auctioneer called, "Number 8, Samuel walked forward. He walked toward the platform. He walked up the first step, and then he ran. He did not run the way a frightened man runs. He ran the way a man runs when he has decided something irrevocable. His feet found the ground with purpose. He cleared the rope barrier in a single stride, hit the dirt on the other side, rolling, came up running north along the fence line toward the wagon. Behind him, voices erupted. A rifle cracked once, high and wide. Warning shots were still given in public spaces for propriety's sake. He heard boots striking wood, then dirt, then the dull thunder of pursuit. He reached the wagon. Elias sat on the bench above him, staring straight ahead, his jaw set, his hands tight on the reins. Samuel grabbed the sideboard and swung himself up into the back, pressing himself between two feed sacks. Elias said nothing. The horses, already agitated by the noise, began to move. The wagon rolled forward. "Stop that wagon!" A voice close and sharp. Elias pulled the reins. The horses halted. Samuel lay flat, invisible beneath the feed sacks, his heart doing something extraordinary in his chest. Not fear exactly, but something vast and wild and fully alive. He heard boots beside the wagon. The boards flexed as someone climbed up. He heard a rough hand slap in feed sacks. One sack was pulled aside. Samuel held himself perfectly still. His eyes were open. He could see a strip of grey sky between two sacks. He could smell burlap and grain and his own sweat. Another sack shifted. The man above him was 3 sacks away. 2. Samuel moved. He came up out of the wagon like something from deep water, fast and upward, and without hesitation. He caught the overseer by surprise and by the belt, and he went over the side of the wagon with him, both of them falling hard into the dirt. Samuel was up first. The overseer was not small, but Samuel was faster, and he had made his peace with this moment, and the overseer had not. Samuel ran. He ran through the north gate, which was standing open because delivery wagons were expected. He ran down the road, behind him, shouting, "Boots!" the sound of a horse being wheeled around. He turned left at the bend where the road met the marsh. He left the road. The marsh swallowed him. He had forgotten, or perhaps he had trusted, how completely the marsh grass could hide a man. 6 feet tall, dense as a wall, the grass closed behind him like a curtain, and he moved through it in the crouching half-run he had practiced in his mind 100 times. The ground beneath him was uncertain. Firm mud, then soft, then water to his knees. But he knew this ground. He had moved through it in the dark on 3 separate occasions, just to practice, just to know the feel of it under his feet. The dogs would come. He had planned for dogs. He reached the cypress root 40 minutes after leaving. The auction yard. The rope was there. He kept moving. He reached the downed pine. The cornmeal was there. He kept moving. He found the flatboat where he had left it 2 weeks prior, half submerged in mud and marsh grass, at the edge of the channel cut. He had spent an hour on 3 separate nights bailing it and patching its seams with pine tar. Now he dragged it free, set it in the channel, and stepped in. He poled north. The tidal creek was brackish and slow, the color of pewter in the grey morning light. Birds startled from the grass as he passed. He could hear, distantly, the sound of men and dogs somewhere behind him, moving through the marsh. He pulled harder. The creek widened. He found the bend he had memorized and took it, following the water's own knowledge of where it wanted to go. By midday, the auction yard was 4 miles behind him. By evening, he had reached a point where the creek met a broader tributary, and the tributary reflected a sky that was finally clearing, and the North Star, when it appeared, was directly ahead of him. He did not let himself feel it yet, not fully. He had known men who celebrated too early. He would travel at night, hide by day, He would avoid roads. He would move toward the Quaker farms Moses had spoken of, toward the constellation of safe hands that might pass him northward. He would be hungry. He would be cold. He would be hunted. But he was moving toward something. 3 months later, in a small Ohio town whose name he kept to himself, Samuel sat in a kitchen with his hands wrapped around a mug of hot coffee, the first real coffee he had ever drunk, and listened to a woman named Margaret read aloud from a newspaper. The words were unfamiliar in their arrangement, legal and dense, but he had been learning to read in the evenings, and he could catch some of them now. He caught freedom. He caught union. He caught words that suggested the great storm he had sensed building was still building, that something was breaking open in the country, that the mathematics of the ledger, Samuel, field hand, $1,100, was being contested by forces larger than any one man or plantation. He thought about Cora, who had been sold to someone while he was running. He thought about Elias on the wagon bench, staring straight ahead, jaw set, saying nothing. He thought about Moses and the lash and the look in his eyes. He thought about his mother, counting his years like a prayer. He picked up his pencil and began to practice letters. He wrote his name first. He always did, Samuel. Then beneath it, something Moses had given him, and something he now gave back to the world as a kind of promise, not from. To. Outside the window, the Ohio sky was wide and blue and carrying no weight at all.